tolerate left-leaning governments, either in South America or Central America. And as soon as they see a government that they think is considerably to the left of center, we move in to replace that government. We have a rich history of doing this. And ever since Chavez won in Venezuela a decade or so ago, the United States has had its gun sights on Venezuela, and nothing has changed. We want to get rid of Maduro, and we would prefer to put in place a right-wing government. If you have any doubts about this, all you have to do is look at our relationship with Cuba since 1959, when Fidel Castro took over there. We've had our gun sights on Cuba ever since. We cannot stand the fact.
This is a pattern we've seen for decades. Anytime a Latin American country leans left, Washington treats it like a threat instead of a democratic choice. Whether it's Cuba, Venezuela, or anywhere else, the reflex is always the same: pressure, sanctions, or regime change attempts. You don't have to support Maduro to recognize the bigger truth. The US doesn't tolerate political models it can't control. And that mindset is exactly why America keeps losing influence in its own neighborhood.
It's like they're going to get everything they want in the peace negotiations. You want to think about what's happening here. This war, apropos what you were saying, is being won on the battlefield by the Russians. And the Americans recognize this. And as a consequence, the Americans are willing to cave to almost all of Russia's demands, as best we can tell. Now, whether the Ukrainians and the Europeans ultimately cave is another matter. But the United States is just facing up to reality, given what's happening on the battlefield, given the fact that there are a number of other problems that the Ukrainian government is facing, one of which is that the United States is not funding Ukraine anymore, and that the Europeans can't come up with the cash to fund Ukraine. And given the fact that there's this major corruption crisis that is undermining Zelensky's standing in Kyiv, and given the fact that Russian aircraft, Russian cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and drones are destroying infrastructure in Ukraine, given all those factors, the writing's on the wall. And the Americans say now is time to cut a deal. And they're willing to cut a deal, the Americans are, that gives the Russians pretty much everything they want, as best I can tell from what you read about the deal in the paper.
This is a major shift. When Washington starts signaling that it's ready to accept Russia's terms, it means the reality on the battlefield can't be ignored anymore. The money is drying up, Europe can't fill the gap, and Ukraine is dealing with corruption issues and collapsing infrastructure. In simple terms, the momentum has flipped, and when the costs outweigh the benefits, even the strongest allies quietly look for the exit.
It's hard to imagine anybody in Ukraine surrendering to these terms. I mean, you want to understand that the Ukrainians have to give up lots of territory to Russia. Furthermore, they're going to have to, according to newspaper reports, halve the size of their military. In other words, cut their military in half. They're not going to be allowed to deploy certain weapons that can hit Russia, for example. There are going to be real limits on the amount of assistance the West can give to Ukraine. And here we're talking about military assistance. There's nothing in the newspapers about Ukraine being in NATO, but it has to be the case that Ukraine can't be in NATO and can't have meaningful security guarantees from the West. So I think the Russians are going to get all of their principal demands.
These terms would be almost impossible for Ukraine to accept. Losing territory, shrinking the military, limiting weapons, and giving up any path to NATO, it's basically a full retreat. And that's the point. Russia is dictating terms from a position of strength, and Ukraine is being asked to live with the consequences. It shows just how dramatically the balance of power has shifted in this war.
Rubio, in his heart of hearts, wants peace, but he wants peace on Ukraine's terms, or the terms that the neoconservatives, people like Victoria Nuland, have been pushing forward. He's a hawk for sure, in his heart and in his head as well, I'm sure. But the fact is that the Ukrainians are losing. There's nothing that can be done to rescue the situation. And Donald Trump, not Marco Rubio, is the president of the United States. And Trump wants to cut a deal. He's had enough of this. Trump recognizes that Ukraine can't win the war. The Russians are winning the war, and they're about to knock out the Ukrainians. I mean, that's what's happening here. The Ukrainians are on the ropes. Whether they go on for another month or two does not matter very much. They cannot sustain this conflict indefinitely. And Trump is recognizing reality. And not surprisingly, he sent Witkoff, not Marco Rubio, to negotiate with the Russians. And not surprisingly, Keith Kellogg, who is a super hawk on Ukraine, has announced his resignation. I'm sure he saw the proposal that's on the table, was mortified, understood that he had lost, and said it's time to quit.
These terms would be almost impossible for Ukraine to accept. Losing territory, shrinking the military, limiting weapons, and giving up any path to NATO, it's basically a full retreat. And that's the point. Russia is dictating terms from a position of strength, and Ukraine is being asked to live with the consequences. It shows just how dramatically the balance of power has shifted in this war.
This UN resolution, which incorporates President Trump's 20-point plan, is a travesty. It's disgraceful. First of all, with regard to the Palestinians, there's no self-determination in there. It's not like the Palestinians are going to get a state of their own, or they're going to have any say on how Gaza is administered. And furthermore, if you look at who's going to be in charge in Gaza as a result of this UN resolution, it's the United States and Israel. And this is the tag team that's been perpetrating a genocide since October of 2023. So in other words, what you're doing is you're taking the two principal perpetrators of the genocide, the United States and Israel, and you're putting them in charge. And by the way, you're creating this board of peace that is going to run things. It's going to be the supreme decision maker in Gaza. And who is the head of this board of peace? Donald Trump? This is hard to believe. And then we're going to bring in an international stabilization force. I doubt that international stabilization force will ever go in there because Hamas has said that it's not going to disarm. And it's hard to believe that that stabilization force will go in there with the principal mission in mind of disarming Hamas and doing Israel's dirty work for it. I just find that hard to imagine. So this just makes no sense at all. I'm shocked that the resolution was not vetoed by the Russians and the Chinese. And I'm shocked that the resolution was enthusiastically supported by all these countries in the Arab and Islamic world. You would think that given the extent to which the Palestinians are being screwed as a result of this resolution, and that's being screwed after 2 years of going to genocide, that these people in the Arab and Islamic world, or these leaders in the Arab and Islamic world, would see fit to oppose the resolution and try to create a new resolution. And this is what the Russians wanted to do, by the way, create a new resolution that led to some sort of self-determination, some sort of meaningful political horizon for the Palestinians, and didn't cater to the Israelis and the Americans. But that didn't happen.
This resolution claims to bring peace, but it gives Palestinians no real control over their future. Instead, it hands authority to the same powers accused of causing the crisis in the first place. Putting the US and Israel in charge of Gaza makes the plan look biased from the start, and the idea of a stabilization force disarming Hamas feels unrealistic. What's most surprising is how many Arab and Islamic states supported it despite the clear disadvantages for Palestinians.
Hardly ever have any leverage over the Israelis, period. But let's just put that aside. If the Israelis believe, and I do believe that they think this is truly an existential threat, then whether or not we have leverage in other circumstances is not going to matter in this circumstance. They're going to think that their survival is at stake. That's the key to understanding what's going on here. When you talk about an existential threat, you're talking about a threat to your survival. This gets back to Ukraine. Putin views Ukraine in NATO as an existential threat. He views it as a threat to Russian survival. Many Westerners don't believe that, but the Russian elite believes that. But coming back over to the Israeli case, I don't think Netanyahu is the only person in Israel who thinks like this. They believe that Iran with nuclear weapons is a threat to Israel's survival. This is something that represents another possible Holocaust. And if you're thinking about Iranian nuclear weapons in those terms, using your own nuclear weapons is not difficult to imagine. And by the way, Judge, it's very important to understand that Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons, so it can't retaliate. Going back to Ukraine, one of the reasons that I was always very fearful in the first year of the war that Russia might turn to nuclear weapons because it was doing so badly on the battlefield at the conventional level is that if Russia used nuclear weapons in Ukraine, Ukraine did not have the capability to retaliate. It had no nuclear weapons. You have an analogous situation going back to the Israeli-Iran case, because if Israel were to use nuclear weapons, small nuclear weapons against Iran that could get their enrichment capability or a potential bomb that they were developing, they would be very tempted to do that because they would have no fear that Iran could retaliate with nuclear weapons of its own. And of course, no other country in the world is going to come to Iran's rescue with its nuclear arsenal. So again, this is a very dangerous situation. And I think it's a very dangerous situation moving forward.
What he's explaining is simple but dangerous. When a country believes its survival is on the line, normal diplomacy disappears. Israel sees Iran's nuclear potential as an existential threat, just like Russia views NATO in Ukraine. And when one side believes the other can't retaliate, the risk of escalation goes way up. That's what makes this moment so unstable. Fear creates justification, and justification creates decisions that can spiral fast.